Alright guys, Tactical here back again today. Hope you are all enjoying it. Your Thursday, I believe, is the day this video is going to be going live, but I'm pre-recording it by a day or so. Today, I wanted to talk about teams with upset potential in the CDL right now. There's a lot of teams, as we have seen at the Atlanta home series this past weekend. Probably the most exciting thing, to be honest, about the weekend. We got the whole delayed Chicago versus Atlanta thing. They didn't end up getting to play because Chicago lost to the Florida Mutineers. One of the key things we learned from the weekend, really, is that this league is not a 1, a 2, a 3 horse race, right? There's a lot of teams with great potential here and huge upset potential as well. That's the thing I wanted to focus on today. It's somewhat, to me, a difficult thing to define, because if London Royal Ravens were going, to beat Chicago or something, that's an upset. However, is that a team that I think has upset potential? Maybe not, because I feel like they're going to play at a kind of consistent level. To me, teams with upset potential are those that you don't expect to be so good on paper, but their players are inconsistent to the point where sometimes they will go off and be able to win a series that you don't expect, but you can't expect it to happen all that often. However, in the format that we're currently seeing for the CDL, and let's just think about this for 1 second, Chicago only lost 1 series this weekend. Usually, at any tournament in the past, you have to lose 2 series to go out the tournament, but Chicago won their first series, albeit very close, against the Toronto Ultra. Then they shook past the Minnesota Rocker in a 3-1 fashion, and then they lost to the Florida Mutineers to go out of the tournament. So they won 2 series, they lost 1, they're out the door. Now, in this weekend, because every match was so close, they didn't play great. That's fine, right? They didn't play great. It makes sense. They went out 3rd, 4th, whatever. However, typically, in a weekend, it's double elim. And the fact that this final 14 bracket is the elimination bracket, effectively the grand finals bracket that, works up to the grand finals, is single elim, it means that there's more potential for upset potential to have big effects in these series, right? Because Florida Mutineers, they beat Chicago once. If they'd have matched up again, do I expect them to do it again? Possibly not, or at least I'm kind of on the fence about that, right? If it's possible that Chicago had gone down, played someone and loses, then gone back to, fight the Minnesota or fight Florida again, for example. But the fact that it's only single elim after that group stage means that upset potential has a higher role to play, in my opinion. So, thanks to Sean Wilkins for the video idea in the comment section below. Do a video on Mutineers and their upset potential and why everyone sleeps on them. And I think this is a good topic and an idea to discuss, but I don't want to just talk about the Mutineers, because there's other teams that I think fit into this category well. And what this really means is top amateur players currently being targeted to multiple COD League teams. I don't know why I started my sentence with what this really means is, because this is actually a kind of different topic, but the thought process is that picking up some of these amateur players into some of these pro teams could give them more upset potential, in the sense that a lot of these amateur guys that are really, really good, they're incredibly talented, they can have a real game where they dominate. However, when you bring them into a team kind of, young and they're, they're not too experienced playing with these players, it's unlikely they're going to be going off every single map, right? And, often they'll play overly aggressive and something like that. So, given the fact that some of these teams are looking to get amateur players, it seems that's definitely a possibility that we're going to see even more upset potential, and inconsistency really is, in a way, a substitute for that terminology I'm using right here. So let's move onwards then to this. These are the results for the Atlanta home series that we saw just last weekend. Atlanta FaZe won it. Mutineers indeed in 2nd place. Rocker in 3rd, sharing the spot with the Chicago Huntsmen. Los Angeles and Ultra down here. Royal Ravens and Paris Legion. Now let's compare this to the overall standings that we see. Huntsmen, FaZe and Empire. A lot of people would still consider those 3 the top 3 teams in the game to some degree. Although, I guess it is somewhat difficult to argue right now, given that Empire have not had great performances and are behind so many other teams. But okay, Chicago and FaZe, they're the top 2. That's not really in contention. The question is, how good really are Paris? And this is where it gets interesting for me in terms of deciding which teams have upset potential. Because in my opinion, Paris have more upset potential than the Seattle Surge, but that's just really by virtue of their names rather than exactly, how good they are as a team. What I mean here is, let's have a look at this. So this is from the London home series, I believe. These were the 8 teams in attendance. The Seattle Surge were one of them. Let's look at some of the names on this team. Karma, Enable, Octane, Slacked, Apathy. So these guys have not been playing well right now. Of course, we know that Enable's been subbed out of the team. Panda is going to come into the team, which if anything gives them more upset potential, in the sense that Panda has, in my opinion, more opportunity to go off and dominate a series than Enable does, for example. But looking at this team of 5, even though they're not particularly good in this game at all, them versus the Huntsmen would not end well for the Seattle Surge if it was these 5, in my opinion. However, if they were to win, it's definitely an upset, but I feel like these players, even though, Apathy's kind of inconsistent, it's not an overwhelmingly inconsistent squad to the point where if they just won that series, it's like fair play, they played fantastic, rather than they're players that you would expect to be playing poorly on the whole, but then they have, a huge upside risk. Now, Paris Legion, despite being better than the Seattle Surge as an all-around team, this is a team where on paper in my head, this is maybe bias speaking, seems to me to have more upset potential. I think part of that is because these players on the whole are pretty inconsistent now. Dins has been kind of consistent, Shox has been kind of consistent, but Zed, Kismet and Luca to me are all over the shop. Sometimes Kismet will have a monster series, sometimes he'll have a very, very quiet one that we saw this last weekend for sure. So it's the same story with Zed and has been his whole career, and Luca as well, has majority been playing kind of poor to be honest, but occasionally he will have a god tier map, and we are expecting that out of him at some point. So to me, Paris, if anything, are a scarier team to play, because you play against the Seattle Surge, in my opinion, you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get Karma, who, I'm not exactly saying all these players are incredibly consistent, but you know that Octane's going to put up decent numbers. You know that Slacked is going to be a 0.951 type of player. Apathy, you can kind of predict exactly what's going to happen. And, you're not expecting Surge to just have a monster series where everyone's dropping huge numbers and, be impossible to play against. You can kind of predict what you're going to get out of these type of players. Maybe part of the reason why a lot of teams nowadays are favouring going for a younger, more aggressive type Slayer player that can, drop poor numbers at times. Guy like Kismet, for example, or can just take over the series. That's why, in my opinion, if I'm Chicago, for example, I'm dreading more playing Paris than I'm the Seattle Surge. Part of that is probably because Paris right now are a better team, but also because they have more upside potential. If Kismet and Zed have a monster series, it's tough to see Legion losing as long as, Dens and Shox keep up their pace. That's why I feel like these guys have, huge upset potential, and they can definitely be up there, because, you're not expecting these guys to consistently beat Empire, Huntsman, and FaZe. Let's say those are the top 3 in theory. But, they definitely have that upside risk. Now, London Royal Ravens is an interesting squad, because I guess you guys can consider these in a similar boat. However, I consider Royal Ravens kind of middle of the pack. You kind of know what to expect out of these players. They're pretty big names at this point. You should expect some decent performances on the whole. They could win a series in an upset. They could lose a series that they're not expecting to lose. And that's the other side of upset potential, right? You can lose series that you shouldn't be losing under any circumstances if you happen to have a really poor series. That's definitely possible. However, if you're middle of the road, I'm not considering that a team with, huge upset potential, even though I guess Paris are in a similar boat. So I'm struggling really to wrap my mind around how exactly to quantify teams that have upset potential. In my opinion, I'm trying to go for teams that are probably, in theory, their players are less skilled than kind of the average, but they have huge potential to just dominate a series if everything works out well for them. Now, Los Angeles Guerrillas are kind of in a similar boat here, because we understand right now that is out of this team, and in his place is going to be Blast coming into the squad to, fill the rest of the guys. So, this is interesting, right? Because you bring Aches out the team, he's a guy who's, going to drop like a 0.8, a 0.9. However, Blast has been one of the most inconsistent players we have seen. As has Decimate, to be honest, as has Saints, as has Lacefield. So this is the team that with Aches out the door, now in my opinion has great potential to just take over a series. Because these are players that if they're all firing on all cylinders, they can pretty much compete and beat anyone, to be honest. Especially when Blast has a good series. Aqua's been a pretty consistent assault rifle. Decimate is very up and down, as is Saints, as is Lacefield a lot of the time. So, I'd feel risky about picking this team to win a series, but in terms of upset potential, I really feel like they have a good shot. So that's why I'm highlighting teams here that are, kind of, they're players you don't really know what you're going to get going into a series. And, you might, on the whole of the course of the year, say that, okay, Decimate might have a 1.05, Lacefield might have like a 1.06 or something, Saints might be a 1.02, whatever. I doubt that's actually going to be the case, because then everyone's positive. I guess with Aches on the team, maybe that kind of makes sense. But whatever the case may be, you may predict that long term, but in the short term, you can get a 2.0, you can get a 0.6. That's not out of the question with these teams, in my opinion. Similar type of story over here. So this is why I wanted to bring the attention backgrounds to the Florida Mutineers, because in my opinion, this is probably the best example we have right now of an upset potential team. And I think this initial comment here from Sean Wilkins really does go into this. And, he really hit the nail on the head. And Mutineers did show it this past weekend, making it all the way to the grand finals. They have players which are super, super inconsistent, but have, like, fantastic upside potential. And Pristini is one of them, right? He's a reigning Call of Duty world champion. And there's no doubt that on that United team, he played a role which wasn't, it wasn't an easy role. He played a kind of aggressive, supporting role, doing what the team needed because the rest of his team was so damn good. And he's a very inconsistent player, to be honest. He's a very emotional player. Sometimes he's up, sometimes he's down. However, when Pristini plays well, and we saw that on the United team, when he has a good map, the rest of his team is consistent, there's zero chance of United are winning a map when Pristini's doing well. Because occasionally on that United squad, Pristini would have a map where he's double positive or 1.5, 1.6 KD, something like that. You're never losing that map if you're a United when Pristini goes off due to how strong the rest of your team are. This team is a slightly different story because you don't really have anyone that's mega consistent. Morks, I suppose, is kind of consistent, but Havoc's always been known as up and down. He plays a super aggressive style, which means that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Skies as an assault rifle was pretty damn good to the end of last season, but sometimes they'll have a series where he performs kind of poorly. But, as we saw this weekend, sometimes he will just take over the game. And Frosty is up there with Pristini for me as one of the most inconsistent players in the game right now. I think he'll get better with time and more consistent with time. But quite often I'm seeing series where he's starting off a hardpoint like 9 in 24, but then the next hardpoint he's starting off 24 in 9 or something like that. And it seems to be a real flip, real switch that is sometimes flipped with Frosty that turns him from a player who, is kind of underwhelming to dominating a series. And if those, triggers click at the same time for the Florida Mutineers, they can beat pretty much anyone on their day. They lost to Atlanta FaZe in the grand finals, but beating Huntsman was, not necessarily, it was definitely a surprise, right? Huntsman, played, a worse level than they should have expected to for sure going into the weekend, but Florida Mutineers give themselves the upset potential with the way they have organised their squad. Now, usually I would say a team like this is not going to win a championship, right? Given the fact that if you're inconsistent throughout the course of a tournament, you're not going to make it work. However, you only need to win 2 series to make it out of the groups. You can be kind of inconsistent and go 2-1 in the groups, make it out into the bracket. Then you've just got to win 2 tournament or 2 matches. And if you're super inconsistent team, super up, super down, like the Mutineers may well be, then it's very possible that you can win that first series like they did against Huntsman, and then kind of play poorly in the grand finals, get completely outplayed by FaZe, and then come second place and get a hell of a lot of points. And on a good day, you might even win those grand finals and win the whole tournament. So with the way it's structured, with the singular limb from that bracket play, it means teams with upset potential are more likely to, make strides at least some tournaments. Now, Minnesota Rocker I kind of highlighted here, but to be honest, I don't really think this team actually has that much upset potential. I just think they're a very good squad because Silly, Assault, GodRx, you kind of know what you're going to get out of these guys now, and Alex as well to some degree, I think is pretty consistent. Asim is the guy that's really your X factor, right? Sometimes he'll have a poor series, but sometimes, as I've seen a fair bit from him, he'll go off. If he goes off, then you've got potential, but that's not upset potential to me because the rest of the squad is just very, very solid. So I definitely wanted to highlight that and talk about that to some degree at least. And then finally here, the Toronto Ultra, Methods, Loony, Classic, Cammy and Bance. These are players that are in a similar boat to me. Methods, you kind of know what you're going to get. Loony's been relatively poor, but Classic, Cammy and Bance are pretty inconsistent players, to be honest, especially in that SMG role. As we saw in that series against Chicago, that map number 4 and Gunner on a hardpoint, when all these 3 players had great maps, they were not missing with the SMGs. They won that map convincingly. And that's not overwhelmingly a surprise, because these are very, very talented players, but they are very, very inconsistent. And I'm not surprised here that they come 8th in the tournament, because Toronto Ultra, they came so close to winning some series here. They nearly beat, I think it was the Paris team that they ended up losing to, and of course they lost to Chicago in the first round to come 8th place. Close series for sure. However, it's super inconsistent, right? Next tournament they could play equally well and have some upset wins and make top 4, maybe even further. They're good enough, to be honest, but they're not good enough on a consistent basis to win a championship, in my opinion. Just before we finish here then, from Lionman v Lionman, just talking through some of these nice looking statistics. So this is Minnesota. Now, Asim is the guy down here on, not the best KDs for sure, but when he has a good map, it's very difficult to win. Paris Legion in a similar boat. Kismet really had some poor performances here at this event, but you compare these stats to Minnesota, it's night and day, right? So if Kismet obviously had a really poor tournament here, the next tournament he might be fantastic again. That's upset potential in a nutshell to me when you have a couple of your players, Zed, Luca, Kismet, in my opinion, that kind of all have that attribute. And then Ultra as well, we see how, Loony didn't play great, but Classic, Bance and Cammy, in my opinion, are all the guys in a similar boat. When you've got multiple players with huge inconsistencies and upside potential, that's when you get a team with upset potential, in my opinion, especially when they're names that you don't expect to be incredibly good on paper. Hopefully that reasoning makes sense. I'd be intrigued to hear what you guys think down in the comment section below, but I do definitely think that the tournament format that we currently have this year is setting up a situation where it gives more potential for upset teams to make things happen, make top fours, make grand finals, make things interesting, and prevent the Florida or the Florida situation where they prevented Atlanta versus Chicago, which a lot of us wanted to see in the grand finals. I'm sure other teams within a similar position will continue to do similar things as time progresses. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like if you did, subscribe if you're new as always. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.